Don't touch that car. The words cracked across the showroom like a starter pistol, sharp enough to turn heads from every corner of the polished glass building. Conversation stopped. A salesman froze mid-sentence. Even the soft jazz drifting through the ceiling speakers suddenly fell out of place. Richard Coleman, the general manager of the luxury dealership, stood near the center of the showroom floor with her arms folded tightly across her chest, staring directly at the woman beside the brand-new Mercedes Maybach. The woman she was staring at was Naomi Carter, 45 years old, calm, quiet, dressed in an elegant black blazer, dark tailored trousers, and understated heels. Nothing about her looked flashy. No designer logos. No diamond jewelry visible on her wrist. No entourage. No salesman walking beside her. Just a black woman standing near a vehicle priced well above $200,000. Richard's expression hardened. "Those vehicles aren't for browsing," she said loudly. "If you're not planning to buy, I need you to step away." The silence that followed felt heavy. Several customers glanced toward Naomi. A white couple standing near a luxury SUV exchanged looks. One salesman looked down at the floor. Another smirked. Naomi slowly turned her head toward Richard. Her face revealed nothing. No anger. No embarrassment. No surprise. If anything, she looked like a woman who had heard those words before. Richard took a few steps closer. "Did you hear me?" she asked. "This isn't a museum." A few people laughed quietly. The sound lingered in the air longer than it should have. Naomi looked at the Maybach one last time before facing the manager. The showroom lights reflected across the vehicle's deep black paint like liquid glass. "I heard you," Naomi said calmly. Her voice stayed low, measured, controlled. Richard seemed annoyed by the lack of reaction. Some people expected confrontation. Others expected apology. Naomi offered neither. She simply stood there, watching, listening, taking everything in. "Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe." These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Naomi Carter. Richard gestured toward the front entrance. "If you're looking for used inventory, there are dealerships a few miles down the road." More customers looked over now. The attention was spreading. The showroom no longer felt like a place selling cars. It felt like a stage. Naomi studied the manager carefully. The expensive suit, the polished shoes, the confidence of someone convinced she understood exactly who belonged and who didn't. Around them, sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long reflections across the marble floor. Everything about the building screamed luxury, prestige, status. Yet the atmosphere felt smaller with every passing second. Tighter, colder. Richard pointed toward the entrance again. "I'm not going to ask twice." Naomi nodded slowly, almost thoughtfully. Then she glanced around the showroom. At the employees. At the customers. At the cameras mounted near the ceiling. A faint expression crossed her face. Not frustration. Not fear. Recognition. As though the test had officially begun. Naomi discreetly opened a notes application on her phone and recorded the time, the comments, and the employees present. And without anyone realizing it, the woman they believed didn't belong had already learned everything she came there to find. Naomi Carter did not move toward the exit. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. Instead, she slowly slipped her hands into her pockets and continued looking around the showroom as if Richard Coleman had become part of the environment rather than the center of it. That seemed to irritate the manager even more. The dealership stretched across nearly 40,000 square feet of polished luxury. Spotlights reflected off chrome accents. Glass walls framed rows of vehicles worth more than many American families earned in several years. Everything was designed to communicate success. Yet Naomi had learned long ago that expensive buildings often revealed their true character in the first few minutes. Not through architecture, through people. 23 customer complaints sat in a secure report waiting for review. 11 specifically mentioned profiling. 8 described customers being ignored based on appearance. 4 used a word that had caught Naomi's attention immediately: humiliation. Most executives would have delegated the investigation. Naomi preferred a different approach. She believed systems told the truth when they thought nobody important was watching. That was why she arrived alone. No driver. No executive assistant. No security detail. No announcement. Just a quiet visit on a Thursday morning. Richard folded her arms tighter. Are we done here? She asked. Naomi finally looked at her. I was hoping to learn more about the Maybach. Richard laughed softly. That vehicle starts well over $200,000. The implication hung in the air. Naomi heard it. So did several customers standing nearby. A salesman named Trevor chuckled from behind a reception desk. Maybe we should show her the brochures instead. More laughter followed. Small. Uncomfortable. The kind people used when they wanted approval from the wrong person. Naomi nodded slowly. She had seen that too before. The willingness of others to follow a leader's assumptions rather than challenge them. Across the showroom floor, a young employee looked up from her tablet. Emily Parker, 26 years old, new to the dealership. She watched the exchange carefully. After a moment, she stepped forward and quietly offered to unlock the Maybach so Naomi could experience the interior. Before she could retrieve the key, Richard immediately shut the idea down and ordered her back to her station. Unlike the others, she was not smiling. Something about the situation felt wrong. Richard noticed her looking and immediately turned away. Her attention returned to Naomi. Ma'am, serious buyers usually schedule appointments. Naomi glanced toward a white customer who had entered less than 2 minutes earlier. A salesman was already opening a vehicle door for her, offering refreshments, explaining financing options. The contrast required no explanation. It simply existed, bright and obvious beneath the showroom lights. Naomi felt a familiar disappointment settle over her. Not surprise, disappointment. Years earlier, when she built her first company from a rented office above a grocery store in Houston, she believed success would eventually shield her from moments like this. Experience had taught her otherwise. Money changed access. It did not always change assumptions. Richard stepped closer. I'm trying to save both of us some time. Naomi met her eyes. Calm, patient, almost curious. That is interesting, she replied. Because I came here specifically to see how your team spends its time. For the first time, Richard hesitated. Only for a second, but Emily noticed it. And somewhere above them, silent cameras continued recording every word. The hesitation vanished from Richard's face almost as quickly as it appeared. Whatever uncertainty had surfaced was buried beneath confidence again. She straightened her jacket and forced a smile that never reached her eyes. That is not how this dealership works, she said. People do not walk in off the street and start evaluating employees. Trevor laughed again, especially not without buying anything. Several sales associates nearby exchanged looks. Some seemed entertained. Others looked uncomfortable. Naomi noticed both reactions. They mattered. Every culture revealed itself through what people tolerated. Richard gestured toward a reception counter near the entrance. Tell you what, if you are serious about purchasing a vehicle today, we can begin with a financial qualification form. Her tone sounded polite on the surface. The meaning underneath was something else entirely. Naomi glanced around the showroom. The white customer who had arrived moments earlier was now seated in a leather chair beside a vehicle consultant. No forms. No questions. No proof. Just service. Naomi looked back at Richard. Do all customers complete financial paperwork before viewing inventory? Richard's smile tightened. Certain situations require additional verification. The answer hung in the air. Emily Parker felt her stomach sink. She stood 20 feet away pretending to organize vehicle brochures, but every word carried across the showroom. The explanation made no sense. She had worked there for 8 months. She knew exactly how customers were normally treated. Trevor stepped closer to Richard. We can save everyone some time, she said. There is no point discussing a Maybach if the budget is not there. Naomi nodded slowly. And how did you determine my budget? Trevor opened her mouth, but found nothing to say. Richard quickly stepped in. Ma'am, nobody is judging you. The contradiction landed heavily. The showroom suddenly felt smaller than before. Nearby customers had stopped pretending not to watch. A woman browsing luxury sedans lowered her phone. An older woman standing near a sports coupe folded her arms and listened. Nobody interrupted. Nobody needed to. Richard was creating the story herself. Naomi walked a few steps toward the Maybach again. The vehicle sat beneath a circle of bright showroom lights. Elegant. Impressive. The flagship model of a brand built on prestige. She lightly traced her gaze across the handcrafted interior visible through the window. Richard immediately moved after her. I thought I made myself clear. Her voice carried farther this time. More people turned. We are not opening that vehicle. Naomi stopped. Why? Richard exhaled dramatically. People with serious money do not usually arrive looking like this. Because I do not believe you are a qualified buyer. Silence followed. Pure silence. No laughter now. No clever remarks. Just the sound of air conditioning flowing through ceiling vents. Emily stared at Richard in disbelief. Even Trevor looked surprised that the manager had said it so openly. Naomi remained perfectly calm. That calmness seemed to unsettle Richard more than any argument could have. Most people became defensive when insulted. Most people tried to prove something. Naomi simply observed. Every sentence, every assumption, every witness. Across the room, Emily glanced toward a dealership computer terminal. A thought had begun forming in her mind. If Richard was this confident, perhaps there was something she did not know. And for the first time that morning, she decided she was going to find out exactly who Naomi Carter really was. Emily Parker kept her eyes on the computer screen, but her attention remained fixed on the woman standing across the showroom. Something about Naomi Carter refused to fit the story Richard was trying to sell. People who wandered into luxury dealerships by mistake usually looked uncomfortable. They apologized. They left. Naomi had done none of those things. She stood with the patience of someone collecting information rather than receiving it. Emily quietly logged into the dealership's customer management system. Her fingers moved carefully across the keyboard. She was not trying to cause trouble. She simply wanted to understand why Richard seemed so determined to push this customer out the door. Across the showroom, Richard continued speaking. We have serious clients waiting for assistance. Her voice carried through the building. I cannot dedicate unlimited time to someone who is not prepared to purchase. Naomi tilted her head slightly. Interesting. Richard frowned. What is interesting? Naomi glanced toward the customers who had begun openly watching. You keep describing me without asking a single question. The statement landed harder than anyone expected. Even Trevor looked away. Richard forced a laugh. I know enough. Naomi nodded slowly. That may be the problem. Meanwhile, Emily entered the name Carter into the system. Hundreds of customer records appeared. She narrowed the search. Then she froze. Her eyes widened. She blinked once and searched again, convinced she had made a mistake. The result remained exactly the same. A special profile appeared near the top of the database. The account carried an executive-level designation she had never seen before. Restricted access. Corporate priority. Internal authorization required. Emily leaned closer to the screen. Her heartbeat quickened. She opened a second internal page. Then a third. Each result deepened her confusion. Whatever Richard believed about Naomi Carter, the dealership's own records were telling a very different story. Out on the showroom floor, a middle-aged customer named Karen Lewis had quietly raised her phone. She was not recording aggressively. She simply sensed something unfolding. Nearby, an older veteran named Frank Wilson folded her arms and shook her head. This does not look right, she muttered. The atmosphere had shifted. It no longer felt like a disagreement between a manager and a customer. It felt like a test everyone was failing in real time. Emily stood from her desk. She hesitated. Richard noticed movement and immediately looked toward her. Emily. Her tone carried a warning. She stopped. Yes. Richard pointed toward another workstation. Go help with paperwork. Emily glanced back at her screen, then at Naomi, then at Richard. Something inside her refused to sit down again. Actually, she said carefully, I think there might be something you should see. Richard's expression hardened instantly. Trevor looked uncomfortable. Several customers turned toward Emily. The showroom seemed to hold its breath. Richard walked a few steps toward her. This is not the time. Emily swallowed. Her nerves showed, but her voice remained steady. I think it is exactly the time. For the first time that morning, Naomi allowed the faintest hint of a smile to appear. Not because anyone had defended her, not because the situation had improved, but because someone in the room had finally decided to trust facts more than assumptions. And once that happens, the entire story begins to change. Richard Coleman's face darkened the moment Emily spoke. The confidence that had carried her through the morning suddenly looked strained. She glanced toward the customers gathering around the showroom floor and realized the audience had grown larger than she expected. People were no longer pretending to browse. They were listening, watching, waiting. I said this is not the time, Richard repeated. Her voice came out sharper now. Emily held her ground. The records do not match what you are saying. A murmur moved through the room. Trevor shifted uneasily beside the reception desk. Karen Lewis lowered her phone for a moment, then raised it again. Frank Wilson shook her head slowly. Naomi remained silent. She stood beside the Maybach as if she had all the time in the world. That calmness seemed to frustrate Richard more with every passing second. Enough, Richard snapped. Ma'am, I am asking you to leave the dealership. The words echoed across the marble floor. Nobody moved. Naomi looked at her carefully. On what basis? Richard pointed toward the entrance. Because you are disrupting business. Naomi glanced around the showroom. Customers stood quietly. Employees stood quietly. The only raised voice belonged to Richard. The contradiction hung in the air for everyone to see. Then Richard crossed a line she could not uncross. People like you come in here all the time, she said. You waste hours asking questions about vehicles you were never going to buy. The showroom went completely silent. Not uncomfortable silence. Shocked silence. The kind that arrives when everyone knows something wrong has just happened. Emily stared at Richard in disbelief. Trevor looked down at the floor. Even several employees who had laughed earlier suddenly avoided eye contact. Naomi did not react immediately. Instead, she looked through the showroom windows toward the bright Texas sunlight outside. For a brief moment, another memory surfaced. 25 years earlier. Houston, a college student with a pressed shirt and borrowed tie. She had walked into a dealership hoping to test drive a used sedan because she needed reliable transportation for her first business venture. The salesman never discussed vehicles, never discussed financing, never discussed options. She simply looked at Naomi and said, "Those cars are probably outside your range." The memory remained vivid decades later. Not because of the car, because of the assumption. Different city, different building, same judgment. Back in the present, Naomi slowly turned toward Richard again. The years between those moments seemed to disappear. The same certainty, the same confidence, the same belief that appearance revealed value. Richard mistook the silence for surrender. "That is what I thought," she said. "Now please leave." Emily took a step forward. "Richard, stop." She ignored her completely. The customers exchanged uneasy looks. The atmosphere had changed. What began as poor service now felt like something much deeper. Naomi finally spoke. Her voice remained calm, but every word carried weight. "You decided who I was before you learned my name." Richard opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Somewhere above them, cameras continued recording. Around them, witnesses continued watching. And for the first time all morning, Richard Coleman was no longer controlling the direction of the story. Naomi Carter reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. The movement was simple, almost ordinary, yet something about it changed the atmosphere immediately. Richard Coleman watched carefully, expecting an argument, a complaint, perhaps even a threat. Instead, Naomi calmly unlocked the screen and typed a short message. Nothing more. No speech. No dramatic gesture. Just a few words sent somewhere beyond the walls of the dealership. Then she slipped the phone away again. Richard laughed. The sound felt forced. "Calling someone to help you leave?" she asked. A few nervous chuckles followed, but they died quickly. The room was no longer on her side the way it had been earlier. Naomi looked at her. "No." That was all she said. One word. Quiet. Controlled. Yet it carried enough certainty to make several people glance at each other. Emily Parker remained beside the workstation, her eyes moving between the restricted records on the screen and the woman standing near the Maybach. Every instinct told her something significant was unfolding. She opened another internal file. Her heartbeat quickened again. The authorization level attached to Naomi's profile exceeded anything she had ever encountered. Even some regional executives did not possess that degree of access. She swallowed hard. Across the showroom, customers continued watching openly. Karen Lewis had stopped pretending to browse vehicles. Frank Wilson stood with her arms folded, studying Richard with growing disappointment. The mood had shifted from curiosity to anticipation. People sensed a turn approaching even if they could not yet see it. Richard attempted to regain control. "This conversation is over," she announced. "I am giving you one final opportunity to leave the property." Naomi glanced around the showroom. The polished vehicles, the bright lighting, the employees standing uncertainly beside their desks, the cameras mounted above every entrance. Then she looked back at Richard. "I think I will stay a little longer." The response landed like a stone in still water. Small, calm, yet impossible to ignore. Richard's jaw tightened. She turned toward Trevor. Contact security. Trevor hesitated. That hesitation lasted only a second, but everyone noticed it. Even Richard. Do it, she repeated. Trevor reluctantly reached for a phone. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away at corporate headquarters, a series of notifications had already begun appearing across executive systems. Internal review activated. Customer experience escalation. Priority level 4. The message traveled rapidly through departments designed for situations exactly like this. Compliance teams opened reports. Human resources personnel accessed records. Video retention systems secured dealership footage. Quiet machinery had begun moving behind the scenes. Back inside the showroom, nobody knew any of that. Richard certainly did not. She still believed the situation belonged entirely to her. Emily looked toward Naomi once more. For the first time, she understood something important. She was not remaining calm because she lacked options. She was remaining calm because she already had them. Naomi glanced briefly at the dealership's large display screen mounted above the showroom floor. Then she checked the time. Her expression never changed. But somewhere beneath that calm exterior, a decision had already been made. The test was over. Now the results were coming. Before anyone noticed the display screens, Naomi calmly removed a gold executive identification card from her pocket and placed it on the hood of the Maybach. Richard glanced at it and dismissed it with a nervous laugh, assuming it was meaningless. The large display screen mounted above the showroom floor suddenly flickered. Conversation stopped. Employees looked up instinctively. Customers followed. Richard Coleman frowned. "What is that?" Nobody answered. The dealership's promotional slideshow disappeared, replaced by a corporate login screen. A second later, a live video feed appeared. A woman in a Navy business suit came into view. Several employees immediately recognized her. Melissa Grant, Regional Vice President, the highest-ranking executive overseeing multiple dealerships across the state. The room went silent. Richard's confidence wavered. "Why is she on the screen?" Trevor whispered. Melissa looked directly into the camera. Her expression was serious, professional, unmistakably focused. "Good morning," she said. "This is an executive compliance review." The words landed heavily. Employees exchanged nervous glances. Richard forced a smile. There must be some mistake. Melissa ignored her. Her eyes moved toward someone standing off camera. Then she spoke words that changed everything. "Ms. Carter, thank you for your patience." The entire showroom froze. Richard blinked. Trevor stared at Naomi. Emily felt her heart skip. Customers looked from the screen to the woman standing beside the Maybach. Melissa continued. "We have reviewed the preliminary reports and secured the dealership footage." Richard's face lost color. "What reports?" she asked. No one paid attention to her. The room had shifted entirely. Melissa's voice remained calm. "Ms. Carter initiated a customer experience audit this morning as part of an executive review process." Trevor looked confused. Karen Lewis lowered her phone in disbelief. Frank Wilson shook her head slowly as realization spread across her face. Naomi finally stepped forward. Not quickly, not dramatically, simply with the confidence of a woman who no longer needed to hide. Richard stared at her. "Who are you?" The question sounded smaller than she intended. Naomi looked directly at her. "You never asked." The silence that followed felt enormous. Melissa spoke again. "Allow me to correct that oversight." She paused. Every eye in the showroom remained fixed on the screen. "Naomi Carter is the Chief Executive Officer of Carter Automotive Group." Gasps spread through the dealership. Trevor nearly dropped the phone in her hand. Emily closed her eyes briefly. Everything in the records suddenly made sense. Melissa continued. "She is also the majority owner of the company that operates this dealership." The room seemed to stop breathing. Richard took a step backward. Customers stared openly. Employees looked stunned. Naomi remained composed. The same calm woman who had walked through the front doors that morning. The same woman Richard had dismissed within seconds. Richard tried to speak. Nothing came out. Naomi finally met her eyes. Her voice stayed measured, controlled, unshaken. "You denied service to the woman who owns the company that owns this dealership." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The sentence settled over the showroom like a final verdict. Richard's shoulders dropped. Emily watched the moment unfold and understood something important. The revelation itself was not the lesson. The lesson was everything that happened before it. Naomi looked around at the customers, at the employees, at the witnesses who had watched every decision unfold. Then she turned back toward Richard. "The problem is not that you did not know who I was," she said quietly. "The problem is how you treated someone you thought did not matter." The showroom remained completely silent. And for the first time all morning, nobody was looking at Richard Coleman as the person in charge. Richard Coleman looked as though the floor beneath her had shifted. Moments earlier, she had controlled every conversation in the showroom. Now she stood surrounded by witnesses, employees, customers, and a truth she could no longer argue away. The large screen remained illuminated above her. Melissa Grant's expression never changed. Professional, precise, unmoved by excuses. "The review team has completed its initial assessment," she said. "Video footage, employee statements, and customer observations have already been secured." Richard swallowed hard. "Melissa, there has to be some misunderstanding." The words sounded weak even to her. Around the showroom, employees exchanged uneasy glances. Trevor stared at the floor. Several sales associates who had laughed earlier now looked desperate to disappear into the background. Naomi Carter remained silent. She did not interrupt. She did not celebrate. She simply watched. Melissa continued. "The footage confirms repeated refusals of service, inappropriate assumptions regarding purchasing ability, and conduct inconsistent with company policy." Every sentence landed heavier than the one before. Customers listened closely. Karen Lewis lowered her phone only long enough to absorb what she was hearing. Frank Wilson shook her head again. "I knew it," she muttered quietly. Richard attempted one final defense. "I was protecting the dealership." Naomi looked at her calmly. "From what?" Richard had no answer. The question hung in the air. Melissa glanced down at a document off-screen. "Effective immediately, Richard Coleman is relieved of all managerial responsibilities, pending final review." Complete silence followed. No one moved. No one spoke. The words echoed through the showroom like the closing of a door. Richard's face drained of color. Then a notification sounded from her pocket. A second later, another. She pulled out her phone and stared at the screen. Access suspended. Management credentials disabled. Corporate systems locked. Her shoulders sank. Trevor's phone vibrated next. Then several department supervisors checked theirs. The review process was spreading through the organization in real time. Melissa's voice remained steady. "An interim leadership team will assume control of dealership operations immediately." Richard looked toward the employees who had followed her lead all morning. None stepped forward. None defended her. The authority she once carried seemed to dissolve right in front of everyone. Emily Parker stood quietly beside the workstation. She felt no satisfaction in the moment. Only clarity. The truth had been there all along. Someone simply needed the courage to acknowledge it. Melissa turned her attention toward Naomi. "Ms. Carter, on behalf of the company, I apologize for what occurred today." Naomi nodded once. "Thank you. Nothing more. No speech. No humiliation. No revenge. Just dignity." That seemed to surprise people most of all. Customers expected anger. Instead, they saw restraint. Richard lowered her head. The room that had once amplified her confidence now reflected every mistake back at her. Naomi looked around the showroom one final time. At the employees. At the customers. At the witnesses who had seen everything unfold. Then she spoke quietly. "Every person who walks through these doors deserves respect before they earn a sale." Nobody disagreed. Because by then, everyone understood the lesson had never been about luxury vehicles. It had always been about character. And character, unlike status, reveals itself when nobody thinks they are being tested. The showroom felt different now. Not quieter. Clearer. The tension that had filled the building all morning had finally broken, leaving something else behind. Reflection. Employees stood in small groups, speaking softly. Customers who had arrived expecting to compare vehicles had witnessed something far more memorable. Above them, the large screen returned to its normal display, but nobody seemed interested in the advertisements anymore. Melissa Grant's final instructions had been delivered. The review process would continue. New leadership would arrive. Policies would be examined. Training would be strengthened. Yet Naomi Carter knew the most important lesson would never appear in a report. It was already sitting in the minds of everyone who had watched the morning unfold. Emily Parker approached her carefully. She looked nervous. "Ms. Carter," she said, "I am sorry for what happened." Naomi smiled gently. "You were not the problem." Emily lowered her eyes. "I almost stayed quiet." Naomi nodded. Almost. The single word carried more meaning than a speech. Emily understood immediately. Courage was not the absence of fear. It was choosing to speak when silence felt easier. Several weeks later, she would be invited into Carter Automotive Group's leadership development program, creating a pathway toward future leadership roles. Around them, several employees listened quietly. Trevor stood nearby, looking embarrassed. The confidence she had borrowed from Richard earlier was gone. In its place was something more honest. Self-awareness. Naomi turned toward the group. Mistakes can teach us something if we are willing to face them. Nobody interrupted. The polished showroom that once felt like a stage for judgment now felt like a classroom. Even the customers remained attentive. Karen Lewis slipped her phone into her purse. Frank Wilson smiled faintly. The story no longer needed witnesses. The lesson had already landed. Naomi walked slowly toward the Maybach that had started everything. The black paint reflected the showroom lights exactly as it had earlier that morning. The vehicle had not changed. The people around it had. She paused beside it and looked back toward the employees. Luxury is not what sits on four wheels, she said. Luxury is how you treat people when there is nothing to gain from it. The room remained still. Every face followed her. Years earlier, a young college student had walked into a dealership hoping someone would see possibility instead of appearance. Today, that same woman stood as the owner of an automotive empire. Yet the memory remained important because it reminded her of something success could never erase. Every person carries a story that cannot be seen at first glance. Every person deserves the dignity of being treated as human before being measured as a customer. Naomi looked around one final time. At Emily. At the employees. At the customers. At the place that would now have an opportunity to become better than it was a few hours earlier. Then she delivered the final thought that would stay with many of them long after the day ended. I did not come here to buy a car, she said. I came here to measure a standard. She paused. And standards rise when people choose character over assumptions. No applause followed. None was needed. The lesson stood on its own. As Naomi walked toward the exit, sunlight poured through the glass walls and stretched across the marble floor. The building behind her remained the same. The people inside it did not. And sometimes the most powerful change begins the moment someone refuses to judge a stranger and starts seeing a person instead.